Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table today?
Well, in our 199th episode,
Woohoo!
which is this one right here,
Yes.
I'm bringing an an essay to this episode / zine.
Yes.
From Interrupting Criminalization that was written by Mariame Kaba. Mm-hmm. It's called Criminalizing Librarians, Threats and Realities. And this essay ties together some history from the past, because that's what history is, to what's happening right now, and outlines some of the stakes involved when libraries are under attack, as they are right now. So she says in the first few lines, quote, "Libraries offer the possibility of knowledge and self-empowerment to all. Because they are at least potentially a force for equality, and because those in power often view knowledge as dangerous, libraries have sometimes been seen as dangerous themselves. Most often, attacks on libraries focus on books. Various interest groups have tried to remove a wide range of books from library shelves. Sometimes, though, librarians who take the egalitarian mission of the library seriously have also become targets of their communities or of the state." And there's also, underneath this quote, there's a great graphic that says the library is a commons, which I think is an important concept, because the library is, as Mariame Kaba says here, it's a place that gives us access to so much, and it's a space that we share in the cost of.
Yes.
And it's not something that we expect, or it's not something that we should expect, and I think most of us don't expect it to turn a profit.
Right.
And I think this is a unique role that the library plays in our society, and it makes it very valuable to us, and it's something we need to defend from the ongoing attacks, like we need to defend attacks to education and all the other public services. And this feels like yet another important battleground to make sure that we are paying attention to.
Absolutely. Well, the thing that struck me about what you just said there about, we all share the cost of it, as also this idea that we share in community with the library. I mean, the libraries are embedded in all of our communities, which also make them a part of, the fabric of our lives in so many ways. And so I think you're right. We have to defend libraries like all of these other things at all costs. And yeah, for me, this was an incredible essay, of course, because it's written by Mariame Kaba, but I really appreciated the incredible analysis of the history of the attacks on public libraries and education and learning, but specifically her focus here on the attacks on librarians throughout history and through to today. There was definitely some history in particular that I learned by reading this essay. So an example of that is one of the first things that Mariame Kaba talked about in this essay is the targeting of librarians during the Red Scares that followed both World War I and World War II. And, I sort of knew that the government was focused on silencing leftists and activists, especially those who identify as Black or identified as LGBTQ. But in this essay, I learned about the 1919 Criminal Syndicalism Act that was passed in Oklahoma. And that law made it illegal to display or distribute materials which, quote, advocated for sabotage or criminal syndicalism. And in this case, that was the term for the sort of undercurrent of organizing and political education that could bring about social change, which of course is so dangerous.
Yes.
And so Mariame Kaba highlighted here in this essay how in 1940, Robert and Ina Wood, who owned a bookstore in Oklahoma City called the Progressive Bookstore, were arrested for possessing allegedly subversive materials, along with 4 of their employees and customers. And with those arrests, the government seized around 10,000 items from the store, including the Constitution, the Bible, a biography of Ben Franklin, which I just thought was what a collection of books there.
Dangerous things.
Dangerous things. And ultimately, an appeals court judge overturned those convictions, but that was after some time had passed, and those folks had already spent time in jail, which is just awful. But what was ultimately really crazy about this case and most of the others that Mariame Kaba shared in this essay was that Robert Wood was targeted because he was a communist and a labor organizer. And the other folks Miriam highlighted were either self-identified communist or just suspected of being affiliated with the Communist Party in some way, shape, or form. And so this was just another example of the ways in which the government targeted these folks. And in these cases, these were specifically librarians and staff working in libraries, working in public libraries across the country. And so it was really interesting to learn this specific target of the government's efforts during that time.
Yeah, the Red Scares throughout our history in this country have been a real flashpoint for targeting activists.
Yes.
And we talked about that on the podcast before.
Right.
We've noted a few times from different pieces of media that these Red Scares were usually tied into racism and used as targets against Black freedom movement workers and other freedom movement folks too, like, as you mentioned, LGBTQ people, and some other groups as well. But Mariame Kaba says, quote, "The Red Scare overlapped with racism. Black people and white people who supported the civil rights movement were accused of being communists. White librarians who attempted to integrate libraries faced swift and violent backlash. For instance, Ruth Brown had spent 30 years as a public library director in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, when she began to advocate for integrating the library in 1950. Local authorities quickly found a reason to fire her. They accused her of circulating supposedly communist magazines, including The Nation, The New Republic, and Soviet Today." So we can see how these mechanisms get built up.
Yes.
And then they get used to target other groups, including people who are in the movement for integration and in the movement against segregation.
Yes.
And so this is yet another example of that and an extension of how we see oppressive regimes control people through their education and through public services. And one of the ways that I think it's important for us to make links to this era and these eras that came before to today, because it's not always that we're importing fascism from Europe. Sometimes we're just importing fascism from 70 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and what's really apparent about this history that she shares here is that really anyone, regardless of how you identified, was a target here, right? And so, you know,
it was about your values.
It was about your values,
Yeah.
absolutely. And those values were standing in opposition to, you know, what this country stood for at the time. You talked about Ruth Brown here and her standing in the movement for integration and really the movement for, I think, liberation in so many ways, you know, and that she became a target as a result of that. So, yeah, that's really
a traitor, some might say.
A traitor, some might say, for what crazy values that she held there. It was, for me, especially difficult to read about the right-wing efforts to target librarians in our present day and how the assault on school libraries has slowly expanded to include public libraries and their staffs as well.
Yeah.
And so Mariame Kaba highlighted, and we've talked about the censorship efforts in school libraries and classrooms by Republicans and right-wing groups in places like Florida. And Miriam had a lot to share about Florida in this piece, rightfully so. Yeah. But it's shameful to see what these efforts have become, if you will. So Miriam shared this, quote, "Legislators are reaching to and stoking a movement on the right which is attempting to smear librarians as a threat to children. Right-wing groups like Moms for Liberty and right-wing influencers like Christopher Rufo who work with politicians to build consensus for censorship and to force librarians to comply. Librarians who object to censorship of LGBT materials are accused of being pedophiles who are attempting to sexualize and corrupt the young. Librarians who object to censorship of books by Black authors are labeled as communists or as anti-white. Efforts to criminalize and stigmatize librarians have been a powerful force in generating pressure and violent harassment." And it just made me so angry to read that. None of that is okay. I mean, this absolute violence that the right is inflicting on librarians, the the true public servants that I think that they are, who are only interested in helping and educating the public and helping and educating our children is just so outlandish and wrong. And the slander that they're using to label librarians, it's anything other than librarian, their title, to me is just so disgusting and so incredibly wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that it always goes back to calling people names.
Yes.
Right? And saying
Right.
they're dangerous, they're communists, they're anti-white. And those are always the things that I think once you learn a little bit about how the history of things have happened in this country, you could be attuned to,
Yes.
oh, these are the things that people in power call people that they feel are a threat to
Yes,
them.
absolutely.
And most likely that's not what we're talking about. Also, read a little bit about the things that they're calling you.
Right.
Or the things that they're calling other people.
Right.
And be like, oh, is that as bad as I have been told that it is?
Come on
Or
now.
have I been brainwashed?
Yeah, what a thought.
Yeah. So a lot of this present day stuff is wild that she talks about. And we've talked about it a bit here before, of course, as you mentioned, but usually in the context of schools, as that's
Right.
been the main focal point for a lot of the coverage that I've seen,
Right.
at least. But of course, they're really consistent and concentrated efforts on cracking down on materials in libraries as well, and right-wing militia groups showing up to drag story hours, and those things
Yeah.
are in our not so distant history. And Mariame Kaba goes on to talk about Louisiana. And
Right.
so she says, quote, Louisiana attempted to pass legislation making it a crime punishable by imprisonment for librarians to attend conferences held by the American Library Association, accused of being a communist organization. Louisiana also tried to pass a law allowing for the removal of library boards and board members without cause, making it easier to pressure libraries to remove books.
Wow.
So calling the American Library Association a communist organization is just nuts. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me
At all. Man.
I just liking libraries and books that's communism. Because it's publicly funded, is that communism? What?
No.
What?
Yeah.
So there's that element, which is I just don't even understand. I can't fathom.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. And then, of course, being able to remove people without cause just because you want to
Right.
is also a powerful tool that would be weaponized against anyone in the future if it had passed.
Yes.
They could make up any reason to remove people in the future
Yep.
because they don't need to provide a reason. So
Absolutely.
they can just say, no, you're not living up to the mission that we want you to live up to, which means we want 1,000 copies of the Bible there and nothing else.
Right.
Or whatever thing that a local county government might say they want in their library, and be able to throw out all the people who actually govern and manage and maintain the library.
Right. What that makes me think about, what the word that came to my mind when you were talking there was is precedent. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, if we allow this to happen for any reason, I think about what's happening right now with museums in DC and the Kennedy Center. And so if we allow this to happen here, what might that mean for the staffs and the boards and the institutions that are these things like the museums and the Kennedy Center, Performing Arts Centers? What might happen to them, right? And the folks who are associated with them. Absolutely. One of the things I really appreciated in this essay was Mariame Kaba's work to connect the criminalization of librarians to the criminalization of other communities we've seen throughout history, and we've talked about here on the podcast. And this also connects directly to what I talked about a little bit ago as well. So Mariame says, quote, "The intense politicalization and criminalization of librarians and the powerful propaganda effort to associate them with other criminalized populations like Black people, LGBT people, and sexual abusers is likely to have long-term effects on the profession and on freedom of speech in the U.S. Librarians have traditionally been considered a helping and virtuous profession, and that has provided them with moral authority to resist censorship and to promote reading. The current right-wing attack on not just books, but curators of books is meant to erode that moral authority and to force librarians to either join in targeting LGBT and Black people or join them in facing state sanctions and state and community violence." And I think she's right, and I worry about the choices she laid out there. That these attacks on librarians will either force them to join in on targeting marginalized communities, or face the criminal punishment system and be targets of state-sanctioned violence or vigilante violence. But I also think there's another choice that's equally as scary, and that's that librarians will just quit. And we know that that's happened. We've seen that be the case with teachers across the country as well. And so, it's just yet another reason why I think we've got to put a stop to this, because we need librarians. I love that she refers to them as having this moral authority, and they are these experts and these helpful folks in these spaces that we need. And I'd hate for all of this to go down and for, dozens, hundreds of librarians just to quit because they don't want to deal with this or be targets of any of this work. It's just so, scary to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's probably also the point, right? I think that's another reason why people are being targeted in that way is so that these services erode into being useless or not seen as needed or something. It's another process by which they're trying to undercut a really valuable public service so that we don't value it anymore, and then we don't trust it anymore, and then we don't want to fund it or give it money anymore.
Absolutely.
So, well, let's talk about application. What can we apply from our conversation to our day-to-day lives and work? I've got a quote from Amanda Jones, who is the president of the Louisiana Association of School Librarians.
Okay.
And she said very succinctly, no one on the right side of history has ever been on the side of censorship and hiding books.
Ooh, yes.
And I'll add to that targeting people who are working toward the expansion of rights for people or who are working against an oppressive regime are never on the right side of history either.
Absolutely.
When you start talking about how these people are my enemy because they believe that so-and-so deserves the same rights that we have, you know that you're onto something. When they start calling people communists or start calling people anti-white or whatever nonsense accusation they come up with, that's usually a sign that they're not going to be on the right side of history. And we'll look at them in a textbook not too long from now.
Right.
Just like we look at George Wallace standing in the doors of that school.
Yes, absolutely.
What about your application?
Well, I just want to comment that I love your application there. I love that quote. And I think for me, I've said this before, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be standing on the right side of history as we think about, as we navigate the moment that we're in and we fight it. It is important to me to be on the right side of history when we look back on all of this. So I really appreciate that application. Mariame Kaba offered some really poignant words to close out this essay. And so that's where my application comes from. She says, quote, "The goal of the right is to use moral panic to transform libraries from public spaces, aspiring to equality and empowerment, into just another site of carceral violence. All those who support libraries and librarians must resist." And I just love that statement. And I love it as a call to action. I also really love that those words are right next to this really cool graphic drawing of the facade of the Free Library of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And the words that are sort of circling around the Free Library of Philadelphia read, "The library is a free space." And for me, part of the reason I was really excited about you bringing this piece to the table was its focus on librarians specifically, and because they are just a population that we haven't focused specifically on here on the podcast. Right. And so I'm really grateful for Mariame Kaba and her work here in this essay in particular. But I also really appreciated how she named the fact that if we allow librarians to be targeted and libraries to be attacked, we will then allow for libraries to become sites of carceral violence. And I just think she didn't mince words there. And I love the naming of that. And I completely agree with her. And that just simply cannot happen. And so that's just a huge takeaway for me.
Yeah. She closed the essay so well. I mean, it's all great, but I think that's such an important and powerful point to make at the end.
Absolutely.
And all of the drawings, the designs of this
that's
throughout
so good.
is great. All right, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? My homework is to learn more about and figure out how I can support, Libraries for the People,
okay,
which is a project that Mariame Kaba started a few years ago, I think. A part of their mission is that they seek to, quote, empower individuals and communities to take action to protect, expand, and defend their local public libraries. They're about, quote, organizing power and people power to fight over public libraries, the common good, and the freedom to read. All great missions, and they have some really great thoughts on how they want to do that. They're not trying to create a political party or anything like that, or a political action committee or anything really top down. They really want to be able to give people skills and values and goals to support their libraries on a local level.
That's awesome.
And whatever that means.
Yeah.
And so because all of our libraries kind of have similar structures but different, and so there's different ways for people to be involved. And you can be on a Friends of the Library board and support your library. You can run for library positions in certain places.
Right.
There's all this stuff on how you can support local libraries, and their goal is to get people to be involved in that and push out like the Moms for Liberty types and those kind of groups, because we don't need them.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And you said Mariame Kaba started that.
I believe so.
Okay.
I might be wrong about that.
Okay.
But that I heard about it through her, and
Okay.
I remember, maybe not correctly, but I remember her saying, this is a project I helped start. And so it might have been in collaboration with other people, but she's affiliated with it in some way, shape, or form.
I love that. Very good. Thanks for amplifying that. I'd love to check that out too. I would love to just dive deeper into some of the examples that she lays out in this essay around some of the history of the criminalization of librarians during the Red Scares and during segregation, because I'm sure there are news stories or other documentation of the folks that she mentioned, like Robert and Ina Wood, who I talked about earlier. And so I just love to see what more I could learn from and about those histories. There's also a significant sources list at the end of this essay, which of course there is. So I want to click through some of those and see what more learning I can do.
Yeah, I skimmed the source list too. There's a lot of good stuff.
Right.
All right. Well, that's it for our great conversation today about criminalizing librarians in this article, zine from Interrupting Criminalization and Mariame Kaba. But Damien, you're up next time. What do you bring to the table in our 200th episode?
Yes. Isn't that wild? I am so excited for us, man, and super proud of us. 200 episodes is incredible. It's a milestone. I have to admit, sort of when we first started this thing back in 2021, and
January 6th, in fact.
January 6th.
Nothing else happened that day.
Just a normal day, Wednesday.
It was a normal day.
But when we started this thing, and I hadn't thought this far into the future of what this thing would become, but here we are, and it's really amazing. And so when I was thinking about what should I bring, like this is a special episode, I thought it might be fitting to take us back to that day, January 6th, 2021. We read a great piece from Waging Nonviolence, and that was our first formal episode where I think you brought that piece to the table and we talked about it in the format that we're doing now. And so I thought we should go back to the beginning.
Yes.
So the piece that we're going to read for our 200th episode is called "What Would a General Strike in the U.S. Actually Look Like?" And it was written by Jeremy Brecher, or Breacher, I don't know how to say his name, but the tagline for the piece reads, quote, "Calls for a general strike in the U.S. are growing. It's important to understand how to organize one, given their key role in overcoming tyrants around the world." And that tagline alone got me. So yeah, I'm excited about it, and I'm excited about our 200th episode, and I'm really looking forward to it. So let's do it.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to reading this too, because it sounds like we've got a tyrant and a regime to take down.
Absolutely.
So a general strike might come in handy.
Yes, it will.
More of us need to know how to help support those.
Yeah, so tune in next week, folks. Listen to that. Be prepared.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week in our 200th episode.